Hello, Kelly, Peter, Noah, and whoever else might be watching this video. This video is going to show the anatomy of a Rift Wars level, and in a second video I want to show how to make a new level starting with a basic concept, and before that I want to show the parts which make up our current demo level. So levels in Rift Wars are based around segments, sequences, and a sequencer which strings these things together. So for example, let's look at, here I'll hit play on our current demo and we'll look at how it starts out. There we go. So that first scene there is what we call the demo trench sequence. And let's look at how that is made up. Here we have Unity, and in Unity all of these things are in our prefabs folder. And if we go into the prefabs folder, we can see there's segments. And in segments, let's look up demo trench. We call it that because this was the first one we ever made for the first demo. And we can see here's these little pieces which make up the level. So for instance, if we look at the arches piece, let's just drag this out into the field here. There it is. And so what we've got is a single cross section of that piece of the level. And so if we look here at the segment in the hierarchy and we open it up, we see that there's several things. There's meshes which make up the floor, the left bank, and the right bank, and that could all have been a single mesh, but it's not. And then also we have a cloud generator up top which creates these nice 3D clouds. And then we also have, if you open up for instance the floor, we have these spawners, an arch spawner and a mine spawner. And actually I should have mentioned spawners before as a key component of a level. Spawners distribute items, prefabs, game objects on our segments to populate the segments. So for instance, if I go back up here to the root, we can see all these bounding boxes. Those represent the various spawners. Like the crystals, you see the crystals on the banks. We've got the arch here. We've got the gravity mines. The clouds actually have their own spawning system that's separate. But if I go here over to the right into the inspector, we can see the script for the segment, and here it is. So the segment is 3,000 wide by 1,000 long. In the future this should be automatically calculated, but right now we have to put it in there. That is, this is 1,000 down the Z, 3,000 on the X. And the sequencer needs to know that because it strings these things together to make a level. And then it also has a collection of spawners on it. And it automatically fills these in by looking through the children to find all the spawners. And we can see here there's these little check boxes, which is sort of like a Unity hack. So that in the editor, we can do things like clear or update the segment. So let's clear it. Boom. There, we've cleared the segment. So now there's nothing on it, it's just the mesh and the clouds. But if we hit move here, which is what happens each time a new one of these segments is made, we can see it's now populated with stuff, but in a different configuration than before. So if we keep hitting this, you'll see it's never the same. Sometimes there's two arches, sometimes there's one, everything's always in a different position, and this is how we get a pleasantly varied experience, but one that is still constrained enough that it's fun. Things make sense, but they're different and varied. So that is a single segment. And if we look at a couple of these other segments here, let's get rid of that one. We'll see what else do we have as far as segments. If we look at, here's one with the pillars. Same kind of thing, except we've got pillars instead of arches. And there's a couple others here. Now, the sequencer resides up here. Let's look back at the hierarchy. See, we have our game object here, and we've got just a couple nodes under it. And these nodes represent the stages of the game. For instance, if we just enable the splash level here and hit play, there's our introductory scene. It's actually technically a level, although we don't really play it. And here we have this SVVR level. This is named because it's the level that we brought up to the SVVR conference. If we enable it, that will start the game playing. And actually, there's one other thing to note here. See up here in the game node here, there's this little red icon here. That's because there's a Playmaker state machine associated with it that handles the typical startup sequence and the bringing up of the intro scene, waiting for the start button. If we look at that here, it's got some pretty simple logic here that will handle the starting of the game, the playing of the game, and waiting for start to restart it, etc. But when we're editing, what we do is we disable that because we don't want to go through the automatic sequence necessarily. We just go in and we'll enable whichever one of these nodes that we want to enable to work on it. So if we look here at the SVVR level, we can see that it's got as its main script on it a sequencer. And the sequencer is the piece which strings together sequences, that is, segments, in a way that creates a level. And the sequencer runs at a particular BPM because we use that BPM so that we can make nice cuts between the sequences right on the beat of the music. We've got several other things in here. For instance, the horizon distance, we set that to 5,000 because that's how big our sky dome is, and it therefore knows how long it needs to make the level. And it also has, if you look at the level, we have our actual our control rig is a child of the level. Right here, it's the rift wing. And we have to fill that in. We have to drag that here into the player object so it knows how to build the level around the player's position. We do that so that each individual level could have their own control rig. So if we want to have a different kind of a control rig for another level, no problem. And you'll also see over here, looking over in the hierarchy, that there are several nodes under the SVVR level that are empty. There's segments, sequences, and sky. And there's also a sky dome, which is actually a, if we double click on it, we can actually see it's actually the dome which works with SkyShop to create the image-based lighting sky in a way that works with the Oculus Rift, unlike the typical Unity Sky Dome, which doesn't. So we have these nodes here, and these are just nodes. These are nodes so that when we start the game, all of the game objects which we create dynamically have a home, so they don't just clutter up the root. They go into here into sequences, segments, and whatever our current sky is. So if we go up here into the SVVR level, we'll see here that it's also got a starting speed because the level acts like a treadmill under the user, and we're starting at 500 right now. Also the multiplier speed factor, that's how much it speeds up as our score multiplier increases. And we'll see here that it's got a list of 12 sequences. Now, we haven't looked at a sequence yet. A sequence is a collection, an ordered collection of segments, because the idea is a lot of times there are patterns that we want to repeat again and again. For instance, here we start with demo trench, mines, and arches, and that might have been a little confusing. What we just did is we went here to assets, prefabs, sequences. We've already looked at the segments here in demo trench, and here's all these pieces. But let's say we want to string together a particular pattern of them. For instance, here we want to start out the level without too much going on. So we create a sequence, and a sequence here is just a blank game object right here. Demo trench, mines, and arches. So in here, here's our sequence script. and it's just got two segments in it. And what it does first is the first one is only mines. And you see right here, only mines, if we drag that out, our first one has only mines. And the reason that we do that as our first one is so when we start the game, the player's not thrust into a situation where there's too much coming at them at once. There's just some things to shoot here. There's just the gravity mines. And then after that, it has arches. So there's a little bit going on there. And the idea is that by making a sequence here, demo trench right here, and all we did to create this was to create a new blank game object at 0, 0, 0 by doing game object create empty, and then adding a component to it of type sequence right here, and the result is what we see here, except that what we did is we just go in here and we drag and drop from the list of things that we've got here. For instance, only mines, we just drag it into here, and now it says there it is, only mines. That's what it said before. But and then the element 2 is arches. So the idea is that as long as this sequence is active, it will alternate between mines, arches, mines, arches, mines, arches. And the sequencer knows how to make that happen for just the right amount of time. So it happens just the right amount of time to make it to the next 8-bar break in the music, if that's how we have the sequencer set up, and that's how we have it set up right now, that every 32 beats things change. So then if we look back here at our sequencer again, let's go back up to the SVVR level, and we'll see that we're set here. Where is it? Oh, here. Change every 8 bars. So 8 bars is 32 beats of music, so we figure out how long that is at 128 BPM. So after the first 8 bars, we're going to switch our sequence from mines and arches to demo trench 1. And demo trench 1 has everything. Arches, pillars, squares, arches, pillars, squares, arches, pillars, squares. It will repeat that again and again. And if we wanted to make any other combination that we wanted to throw in there, we just make another sequence and add it to the sequencer. So if we look back here at the sequencer, we can see that there are 12 of these sequences, and if you add it all up, 12 of these with 8 bars each add up to the 3-minute level that we have. And so if we look through here, you can see we've got the demo trench, and then we go to clouds and cones, and then we go to alternating tubes, then back to demo trench, and then spinning every 4, which is another tubes sequence, and then sky islands, clouds and cones, then that long spirally tube with the fans in it, demo trench 1, and that's it. And so by dragging and dropping sequences, which we have made by putting together segments in a particular order, we can compose a level that does what we want it to do and creates the experience we want to create. And the other thing we can see here, the next thing that's important to see, is that there's another collection down here of skies. And this collection of skies down here, there's also 12 of them, allows us to say what image-based lighting environment do we want to go with the corresponding segment. So for instance, right now we're starting with Golden Hour, it's called, which is actually the inside of a museum. And so here, if I start the level right now, we can see that it should start with that sort of golden orange sky. So if we want to change that, for example, to start with something a little bit brighter, and in fact I think we do. I decided this the other day that it would be better to start with this other one that I have called Barcelona Sky. So we're going to change that. So it's Barcelona Sky all the way for the first 24 measures. And so see, now it says Barcelona Sky goes with demo trench, mines and arches instead of Golden Hour going with mines and arches. So now if we start the game, I think that's a nicer way to start the game, to start this level. And so right here, by looking at these collection of sequences and skies, this is what makes up the first level, the first SVVR level. The only other thing here that we have on the level node is an audio source which has the music that we play. And this is a 128 BPM track that I made for this, particularly for this level, where the things that happen in the track correspond artistically with the things that happen in the level. And actually, we don't need this segment mover anymore. So that's what makes up a level. Some of the other things that I can, let me see if there's anything I didn't show. I know a couple other things I should show is there are more spawners. For instance, if we look at the demo trench segment again, and let's look at the pillars. I'm just going to drag this out here. See, the pillars are using a surface spawner, which is attached. It's a pillar spawner. So if we clear it, let's clear it first so that it's easier to see what's going on. Clear. There it is. So here's our floor, and it has two spawners on it. It has a pillar spawner and also has a mine spawner. Actually, this one, both of these use the surface spawner. Let me just show you this spawner right now. This is called the scatter surface spawner. So by attaching a game object to the floor and giving it this scatter surface spawner script, this is a spawner. We give it a prefab, a pillar, and we say we want a minimum of 3, a maximum of 5, and we want to give a random rotation of the Y, and there's a couple other things here. For instance, we can put a variation in of, actually the variation is the same, so it allows us to give an offset on the Y so that it buries in the ground a proper amount. But if you wanted to spread things out, you could put a range in there. We also have a volume spawner, a scatter volume spawner. But we are not using it in this segment. So let me find one where we are using it. Let me populate that again. Let's look at another segment. Let's look at one of the tube segments. So there we go. Here's tube 1 lollipops, or tube segment 2. Let's look at that. Yeah, there we go. So here's a segment of a tube, and you'll see it's got these mines floating, and they're just floating inside of a volume. So the way that works, if we clear it, let's clear the segment. There it is. You'll see there's a metal cube spawner, and you see the green bounding box? That's you have to give it a collider, and so this has a capsule collider and a scatter volume spawner attached to it. And what the scatter volume spawner does is it looks at the collider attached, and you have to make sure when you put the collider on that you set it to is trigger, because otherwise it will actually act as a collider, and we don't want it to create any collisions. We just want to use its volume. And by doing that and filling out these values here and giving this a prefab, it will scatter a particular number of things in that volume anywhere in the middle of the air. So for instance, right here, if we try that again, we say move, you'll see each time we do that, it's scattering those cubes in the air. It's putting that spear on the ground with a scatter surface spawner and the cubes in the air. And I believe that is all you really need to know about how to make a level in RiftWars. Coming up, I'll show how to make a new level from scratch.